verify the stream.
Slight apology.
Yep. Well, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. Okay. Welcome everybody to the July 2019 Rider Oversight Committee meeting. Quick MBTA mandatory safety briefing. If there's an emergency, our gathering spot will be outside on the street next to the Dunkin' Donuts, but not inside the Dunkin' Donuts, on the outside next to Dunkin' Donuts. Does anybody know CPR? Anyone at all know CPR? Okay. You were okay, no problem. It's good to know that you were.
Partially reliable.
Yeah. Well, yeah, sure. The nearest AED, I just realized today, is not at the guard station. It's actually right on the wall opposite where the restrooms are.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, so that's what an AED is. Yeah. There is a notable tripping hazard out here with 1, 2, 3 cords. So if you're crossing the room through the middle, be aware of 3 different cords. And I think that's the... Oh yeah, an emergency exit, obviously 2 exits there, and that's also an emergency exit. Also, I don't know where that one goes. There we have it. Amazing. Oh, welcome everybody. It's MJ's first meeting. I thought it might be good to have him, or give him a chance to introduce himself. He's our new intern. Tell us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind. Sure. Because we'd love to get to know you.
I'm MJ. I'm a fifth-year sociology major at Northeastern, minor in economics. I'm originally South African, but I've been living here for about 15 years now. This is my 3rd week here at Mascot, so look forward to seeing how it's being good.
Thanks very much. And let's go around for his benefit and introduce ourselves. It's very good to have here. Stefan Wunsch, first month as the co-chair, elected last month as the co-chair of the full committee. I'm also the co-chair of the marketing, operations, and communications subcommittee. I live in Lynn and commuter, I think, all the lines except for the blue on a regular basis.
My name is Carl Segelum. I'm the other co-chair for this committee, and I've been on the Rock a year and a half, I think, and co-chair for a few months now. And I live in Brighton and take lots of bus and some subway and occasional commuter around.
One of the things co-chair for the capital investment and finance subcommittee. I'm going to leave it at that. I've been walking a lot more lately, so I'm one of those people where you now see people use the bus less. I'm not using Uber, I'm just walking more. So I used to take 77 out of Rock Square, and I just walk, take the train to Gale Line and walk. It's great. It's great. I love it.
Andrew Clark, I'm staff liaison for Central Transportation Planning Staff.
Kirk Oskowski, public member, daily rider of the slow line, the red line, and then I also proud rider of the MBTA high-speed line, also known as the Troll.
Oh, you've never been to that before.
I'm Karen Websick. I live in Jamaica Plain. I don't own a car, so I'm on the T every day, all lines. Just came back from South Coast.
Right.
Yep, I'm Eric Berkman from Service Planning and MBTA Service Planning. I like the 120 bus, I live in East Boston, but I mostly take the blue line and walk. All the transit users are pedestrian space.
I'm Anne McGann. I'm the project manager for the Boston Airport's long-range transportation plan.
Hi, I'm Kate White. I'm with the Boston Region as well. I used to be a big 86 rider, but now just really take the red line.
We're just going around doing intros.
You're the last one.
I'm Wade. Hi, everybody.
What do you do, Blake?
What do I what?
Get here. What
Oh, I take the 88 bus and the Green Line.
Okay, sorry for my distraction there. I had some audio interference that was pretty bad, but I just got it worked out. So we're all set.
Okay. After calling the meeting to order, the next item on the agenda is public comments. I didn't see any sign up for it, but wanted to ask if there was anyone who wanted to provide public comment tonight. Okay. When do you still?
You should call it, I mean, so Brian's not here and Amy's not here. You expect they're both coming, you know. Those are our decisions and left to the chair.
And what was the time that you said you needed to be out? We don't want to impose. Glad that you're here.
No, whatever.
So let's take a few minutes and by a few minutes, rearranging the order and recapping the Marketing, Communications, and Operations Subcommittee.
I can do that. The meeting was on the 11th of this month, and we had a special guest of 3 people. We had well, besides our planned Logan Nash and Jesse Richards from the Real-Time Data and Customer Technology Department, we had the unplanned visit, which is always a great thing, of Dave Carney, the Deputy GM for bus operations. The focus of the meeting was all about the real-time data efforts that Logan Nash heads up with Jesse as the head of the developer team at MBTA. They have a number of developers, and when I say developers, I mean programmers, people who are dedicated to coding and putting out not only the real-time data itself, but also making the predictions work, as well as establishing the format of the data so it can be consumed by all the third-party app developers and everybody who's got something on their phone that reads the real-time data. So they've got a whole team of that. The big focus of the discussion was about the red line derailment. Yeah, go ahead.
Just to clarify, I don't think she just had the developers under her. I think she also had essentially the call center, like people doing, like, what you wouldn't consider to be a developer, not just doing long-term code work, but actually in the field responding to things. I thought that was under her purview as well, or is that wrong?
I don't believe so, no. You're talking about the people who are the, wait, I have the acronym, the people at the OCC, people at the Operations Control Center who are the customer outreach people. I don't believe they report to her. Is that?
Maybe I'm thinking something else, but that's fine.
Okay. I know what you're thinking. I don't think they report to her, but.
Yeah, that's my impression too, that they don't.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, and I'll stand corrected.
No, it's okay. That's fine. No, I mean,
I read everything on it, but that was my sense.
No, I was trying to, because I knew they had a calls monitoring app that he showed us in that war room or in their office. So I wasn't sure what that group did, what that function was. Well, take it aside.
That's okay.
Slowing down progress.
That's okay. The notable events were that the first morning of the derailment, they shut off the real-time countdown signs on the entire red line because they had no visibility into that section that was affected because the signal system was essentially destroyed. They brought things back up online slowly, but in the beginning they had an accuracy that was, sometimes they saw as bad as 17%. And they said that in cases where the inaccuracy of the predictions is so great, they don't even want to issue, they don't even want to show a countdown in minutes because it's just so wildly inaccurate. So instead they switched to the number of stops away when the location of the train was in fact known, but the time to get to the predicted stop was just so inaccurate. And they found that was actually quite effective. They originally started off using a switch to the stops away, very specifically when the accuracy was very, very low, and I put down that the accuracy was less than 6 minutes, but then I put down that they switched to the countdown clocks when the accuracy was more like 12 minutes. I think I flipped those two in my notes, but case in point, they are able to, on the fly, at any station, even within the station, individual signs, switch to no predictions, the predictions that are the standard number of minutes away, or the number of stops away. And their system allows for control of pretty much, as much as you can imagine, every sign in every platform in every station can be selected for a different display. So it's pretty much the maximum amount of flexibility that you could possibly imagine. So I was very pleased about that. It allows them to select the best message at the best time for any particular target audience. PIOs, that's the term that I was trying to pull up. Public Information Officer is a role at the Operation Control Center that has control of the countdown signs, where they can switch it to an automatic number of stops away, or the countdown signs, or they can even switch to a mode where it's based on headway of what the published schedule is. So it doesn't even have to operate based on where the trains are in real time. They can have the countdown signs operate based on the standard published schedule. So again, many, many options. At the time that we met with them, which again was July 11th, they were still suffering with the dead zone, where, that's what they called it, the dead zone, where there was no signals. And they were looking into very creative options where they were thinking about using the security cameras and the motion detection of the security cameras to be able to provide some sense of where the train is, because if the camera can detect most of the train coming in.
I'd walk that back. I think you've given them, they brainstormed a whole bunch of ideas. I think that was one of the ideas that they brainstormed.
No, they said that they tried it. They said that they had tried it and that they had some level of success with a targeted test of.
Right, I just don't want that. I don't want it to necessarily reflect that they imply this, I think, great coming 2 weeks from now. I don't.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they didn't say that it was something that they were going to do, but they said they had great success with a targeted test of using the security cameras to detect trains, which, in my judgment, is excellent outside-the-box thinking.
Yeah.
And as far as our role as oversight goes, I think that it's laudable that they were thinking outside the box to such a degree of trying to use security system video in a way never used before in this particular outage case. I'm not trying to be a cheerleader. I mean, obviously there was an outage and they were scrambling, but again, it was notable and laudable that they were thinking that way, very creatively. I'll jump ahead a little bit. There was also a discussion about the commuter rail data and some potential enhancements that could be brought to the granularity of the data. And then we moved on to talking about the Harvard Busway project. And Dave Carney, again, the Deputy GM of Bus Operations, said that there were no serious issues maintaining the planned service. But there was a direct relationship. I don't know if you remember, there was a fire caused by a trackless trolley on Huron Ave that inadvertently brought the wires down. The wires dropped onto the following bus and caused a fire on the bus. It was a significant incident. That event with the wires coming down and the fire was, according to Dave Carney, directly related to the vehicles using what's normally a not-in-service area of Huron Avenue that normally doesn't see that level of traffic, or even any traffic, because that area of the route was being used specifically because the outage of the Harvard Busway means that the vehicles have to get from the North Cambridge car barn all the way around to the Watertown and Waverly routes by this detour. So the fire was unfortunate, but Dave said it's essentially cause and effect because they were using an area of the route that normally doesn't see very much traffic, if any. And finally, we had a discussion about the harder to hail like bus shuttle replacement service during work outages, and a lot of the finer points of routing the vehicles and some of the pros and cons of different variations of the bus replacement service. I think I'll leave it at that because I've already gone on a little longer than I planned. So thanks for putting up with me, and thank you for jumping in. I appreciate that very much.
He's the new co-chair. So you can't just brush off these.
Oh, I'm not. Thank you.
Great. So let's go back to our regularly scheduled agenda. We're very happy to have here from CTPS and Boston MPO, Anne McGann, to talk with us about the long-range transportation plan. Thanks so much.
Yeah, we'll just scoot off to one side. And I'll get the lights for the slideshow.
It just has to,
Wow. Let me hit that again for you? Yeah, allow me.
I just opened the, should we shut it and it'll have it on?
Power. That looks promising. Yeah, that's coming to life now.
Yeah, takes a little bit to warm up.
Yeah, no sweat.
So I'll just start. Again, I'm Anne McGann. I am the project manager for the Boston MPO's Long Range Transportation Plan, or what we call the LRTP, and the new plan is called Destination 2040. So today I'm here to talk to you about the LRTP. Staff is currently waiting for some additional information for the plan, and then we will release it for public review for a 30-day comment period. We're hoping that it was going to be out for public review now, but there's going to have to be some information that we're waiting for. Once that's available, it will be put out for a 30-day comment period. And once it is released, we will send out a notice notifying the public that it is available on our MPO, on the MPO website for 30 days of public review and comment. So to start, I just want to familiarize you with the MPO's planning process and how the LRTP fits into that. The MPO's planning process includes developing 3 certification documents. We have a long-range transportation plan, which is adopted every 4 years. We have a unified planning work program, or what we call the UPWP, which is developed annually. And the transportation improvement program, or TIP, is also developed annually. So the LRTP provides a 20-year vision for transportation in the Boston metropolitan area. And it creates the framework that the MPO will use to set its priorities for federally funded transportation planning studies and capital improvement projects. So it's important to note that our funding is for federally funded projects. It sets the vision, goals, and objectives for transportation in the region. And we also develop a needs assessment as part of the LRTP to provide information on various components of the transportation system. Its existing condition, how it is used, and how it is projected to be used in the future. So the Unified Planning Work Program, or the UPWP, is the planning element of the certification documents, and it is guided by the LRTP's vision, goals, and objectives that are established as part of the long-range transportation plan. Among the other activities, the UPWP funds transportation studies that the MPO will undertake in any given year, and some of which address the transportation needs that are identified as part of the LRTP needs assessment. The TIP is the implementation arm of the LRTP and prioritizes funding for transportation infrastructure projects. It covers the first 5-year time band of the long-range plan. A project that changes capacity or to the transportation system or costs over $20 million must first be programmed in the long-range plan before it can be funded as part of the TIP. So all other smaller projects can be directly programmed in the TIP for funding. So then there's a fourth aspect to the planning process, which is our performance-based planning program that includes 3 separate phases. The first is the planning phase, and that identifies performance measures and targets, which are used to assess progress in achieving the LRTP's vision goals and objectives. The second phase is the investing phase, which allocates funds to studies in the UPWP and transportation projects in the TIP to achieve the MPO's goals. And then the monitoring and evaluation phase, which continually reviews and reports on progress on the established performance measures. So that's just a quick overview of the MPO's planning process and the certification documents that the MPO undertakes on an ongoing basis. So now I want to get back and focus on the long-range transportation plan and go through the information that will be included in the LRTP once it is out for public review. So first, there's actually 2 pieces of this. There's the needs assessment and the LRTP document. So first, I'll go through the needs assessment, which is volume 1 of the long-range plan and includes all of the background information and details used to identify the transportation needs in the region, and it is used to develop the recommendations as part of the long-range transportation plan. So over a 2-year period, the MPO staff performed analyses and gathered input from the public on the transportation needs in the Boston region. So this document actually includes all of the research and analyses and a summary of the input that we received throughout this process. Chapter 1 is the introduction describing the document's organization and the process for its development. Chapter 2 describes the existing land use, the process that we use to project the future land use, and some key demographic trends into the future. And then the second part of this chapter describes the existing transportation system in the region. Chapter 3 describes the travel patterns in the region, both auto and transit, bike and ped, as identified using the MPO's travel demand model for both the base year of 2016 and then a future 2040 no-build conditions. It describes the travel patterns into the Boston Business District and the larger central area, and describes travel outside of the urban core, including suburb-to-suburb travel. And then chapters 4 through 9 describe the transportation and needs in the region by the 6 MPO goal areas, which include safety, system preservation and modernization, capacity management and mobility, clean air and sustainable communities, transportation equity, and economic vitality. So chapters 4 through 9 are formatted the same for each of the chapters, and they include an introduction to the goal area, the revised goals and objectives for each of the goals, for each of our areas, a needs summary statement with a table that summarizes the transportation needs in that goal area, a section on understanding the specific needs in the region, which includes the research and analysis performed by staff, and as well as the summary of the stakeholder and public input that were received on each of the goal areas. And then it finishes up with the updates since the last needs assessment that we performed for our current plan, which is Charting Progress to 2040. So just to finish up with the needs assessment content, Chapter 10 includes a summary of recommendations to address the transportation needs by goal area, and was then used to choose the recommendations for projects and investment programs in the draft LRTP. The appendices include the policies, plans, studies, and data that inform the needs assessment, relevant MPO studies and reports, data resources used for the needs assessment, and it also includes our public input process used to gather the information on the transportation needs in the region, and then information we use the public input from the needs assessment to revise our vision goals and objectives for this new plan, Destination 2040. So the LRTP document itself, in Chapter 1 includes the introduction and describes the process used to develop the LRTP along with the selection process for the recommended projects and programs. Chapter 2 includes a summary of the transportation needs that is included in the needs assessment. Chapter 3 summarizes the highway and transit finances to improve and maintain the transportation system in the region. And then Chapter 4 is the recommended plan chapter, which describes the investment programs and project selection, and then lists the projects and investment programs that were selected for the recommended plan and provides a description for each. And then it includes the travel demand model results for our 2016 base year, our 2040 no-bill, and our 2040 bill conditions. Chapter 5 is the system performance plan. This chapter describes the MPO's current set of performance measures and targets and provides information about the current state of the region's transportation system with respect to the relevant performance measures. It also explains how the recommended Destination 2040 plan will help the MPO make progress toward its performance goals, including those for pavement, bridges, bike and pedestrian improvements, and congestion. Chapter 6 is the Transportation Equity Performance Report. Chapter 7 is our air quality chapter. And Chapter 8 actually outlines the next step for implementation of Destination 2040. We also include a universe of projects and investment programs list from which the recommended list was chosen. We have a project evaluation methodology, a draft disparate impact and disproportionate burden policy, or DIDB policy, which I'll get into a little later, and then the public outreach process that we used in the development of the LRTP. So that's just giving you an idea of what's included in these 2 volumes when it does come out. But I'd like to get into a little more detail on the actual projects and programs for the recommended plan, and then some additional information. So, as I said, in Chapter 4, it includes the recommended plan, which lists the recommended projects and investment programs funded with our regional target funds. The MPO has about $2.9 billion in regional target funds to program over the next 20-year time frame of Destination 2040. So the MPO mostly uses its regional target funds for highway projects, although it has flexed some of that funding to transit projects in the past. We've flexed some highway funding to the Assembly Square MBTA stop and the Green Line extension in Somerville. So the MPO generally allocates all of the MBTA's future capital funding to system infrastructure maintenance, accessibility improvements, and system enhancements. So this slide shows the investment programs and program funding goals that the MPO voted to include as part of the draft LRTP. The first is the Major Infrastructure Program, which includes all projects that change capacity to the transportation system or that costs over $20 million. The funding goal that the MPO established for this program was to program no more than 30% of our regional target funds to major infrastructure projects, allowing it to more funding to be available for the smaller operations and management type projects. Complete Streets Program, the MPO is allocating 45% of the funding, and the MPO actually allocated 2% of this funding for construction of dedicated bus lanes. So this was a new addition to the existing investment program. The Intersection Improvement Program, 13% of the funding. Bicycle Network and Pedestrian Connections Program is 5% of the funding. And the Community Transportation Parking and Clean Air and Mobility Program, which was established as part of Charting Progress in 2040, but we are now, we're continuing that, but we are now calling it the Community Connections Program. And that's 2% of the funding of our regional funding target. And this includes funding for projects That could include transit operations for projects that close gaps in the transit network, which includes first mile, last mile connections, additional parking for autos and bikes near transit stations, and then also funding for connecting elderly adults with transportation.
And pardon me? Is it your preference that we hold questions to the end, or do you not have a preference? It's up to you.
It's up to you. I have probably about 5 more minutes, and then unless you want.
That's great.
Do you have questions?
Yeah, let's wait till the end. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. And additionally, the MPO established a new investment program under Destination 2040, which is a transit modernization program, and that will flex 5% of our regional target funds to transit modernization improvements. So now just to go through the projects that are selected. As I said, we have to include any project that either changes the capacity of the system or is over $20 million. So this slide lists the major infrastructure projects that are being funded with our MPO target funds. As I mentioned earlier, and I just said that we have to add these projects must be listed in the RTP before they can be programmed in the TIP. So in Destination 2040, the MPO is continuing to fund the projects that are included in the current plan, charting projects to 2040, 2 of which are now programmed in the 2020 to 24 TIP. So the projects shown at the top that are currently in the 2020 to 24 TIP are the Rutherford Ave project in Boston and the new Boston Street Bridge replacement over the MBTA in Woburn. The next set of projects are projects that are included in Charting Progress to 2040 and are continuing to be funded in Destination 2040 and include the Route 126, 135 project in Framingham, Route 4 and 225 in Lexington, Route 27 over Route 9 in Natick, and the McGrath Boulevard project in Somerville. The MPO also added 2 projects that are shown at the bottom that are included in the 2020 to 24 TIP, mostly because of their costs. They cost over $20 million, which is the reconstruction of the Sumner Tunnel in Boston and the Route 1A construction in Walpole, and then Western Ave in Lynn was also added as a new project. So the 5 major infrastructure projects shown here are included in our Transportation Equity Performance Report chapter of Destination 2040 because they change capacity to the transportation network and are included in the travel demand model. I'll talk a little bit more about these projects, but just wanted to show that these 5 projects are included in our transportation equity analysis. This shows the projects that are included in the LRTP as MPO-funded projects that what we are considering no-build project. And these are no-build projects because they are in the current year of the TIP or they are under construction. And they include the Green Line extension to College Avenue, Union Square in Somerville, the reconstruction of Highland Ave, Needham Street, and Charles River Bridge in Newton and Needham, and then a new connection from Bergen Parkway over the MBTA in Quincy, which this project is actually funded with Commonwealth funds. The plan also includes projects that are state funded that are considered major infrastructure projects, and this is Cypress Street Extension in Boston, the Alston Multimodal Improvement Project in Boston, and the reconstruction of I-90 and 495 interchange in Hopkinton and Westboro. And then these projects listed here are projects that are funded and included in other MPOs where a portion of the project is located in the Boston region MPO. It includes the South Coast Rail Phase 1 from Boston to Fall River in New Bedford, which is funded by the Commonwealth and listed in the Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development District, or SERPED, LRTP, and then the reconstruction of the I-495 Route 9 project in Southborough and Westboro, which is listed in the Central Mass MPO LRTP. So I just want to quickly touch on this transportation equity performance report. It includes the federally required Title VI and environmental justice analysis that are completed for Destination 2040. I'm not going to get into too much detail on this chapter today. This would be a presentation in itself. But I wanted to mention it because Len was part of our MPO committee to develop a disparate impact, disproportionate burden policy, or what we call our DIDB policy, used for this LRTP. So as I said, more details can be found in Chapter 6 once the plan is released. This analysis uses the travel demand model and to look at the aggregate impacts of the projects on low-income and minority populations compared to non-low-income and non-minority populations in the region. So the definitions of the disparate impact and disproportionate burden are shown here. The disparate impact is a neutral practice that disproportionately affects a minority population, while the disproportionate burden is a policy practice that disproportionately affects low-income populations. So this slide shows the metrics that were used in the DIDB analysis. Again, the analysis uses the travel demand model and analyzes the metrics as shown here. When this analysis was performed with the 5 projects that I showed you earlier, it showed that there were no disparate impacts or disproportionate burdens. So Chapter 7 includes 2 parts of the air quality chapter. The first is an air quality conformity determination for ozone and carbon monoxide, which is required by federal regulation. And the second is a greenhouse gas analysis required by the Commonwealth and the Global Warming Solutions Act. So the air quality conformity determination explains how the LRTP has the latest planning assumptions, follow the required air quality consultation process, ensures that the transportation control measures included in the state implementation plan are moving forward in a timely manner. And the 2 projects that are considered transportation control measures are the Green Line Extension Project and the Fairmount Line Improvement Project. And then we also must show that the LRTP is a financially constrained document. For the greenhouse gas analysis, a statewide analysis is performed for this. The travel demand model was used to calculate carbon dioxide emissions as a result of the projects in our LRTP, along with the projects included in all of the LRTPs in the Commonwealth. So the greenhouse gas analysis compares the 2020 no-build to 2020 build conditions and the 2040 no-build to 2040 build conditions to determine if there is a reduction in carbon dioxide from the projects in plan. So a no-build scenario includes all projects that are either under construction, have been advertised, or in the first year of the TIP. And the build includes the new projects that are in the LRTPs. So as shown here, the results show that there is a reduction of carbon dioxide of 190 tons in 2020 and a reduction of 218 tons of carbon dioxide in 2040. So that covers, in a nutshell, information that will be out. They're fairly large documents. It's about 750 pages in the 2 documents. Once the LRTP is released for public comment, it will be posted on our MPO website. This slide shows you how you can, we will inform you on the release of the LRTP and how you can comment on the plan. Once you are on our website, we'll also have a survey that will be available to solicit feedback on the projects and programs in the recommended plan. And we also have this brochure, which I think most of you got, but if not, they're at the table, that provides some more information on the different investment programs, on the plan, and then on the back, it also gives you the information on how you can stay involved and comment on the program. So with that, it's a lot of information.
Going back to the public comment, one question was, will the comments received in this period after the draft report go out will those comments then be incorporated into the reports, like the appendices and the appropriate sections of chapters 4 through 9 of needs and so on?
Right, so what we'll do is we will bring all the comments together, we have a matrix of what the comments were, and then what the proposed MPO action is. And if there is an MPO action, that will get incorporated into the chapters. And then that matrix will be part of the public input appendix, and we actually have that matrix in there that shows the comment and the MPO action.
Thanks.
So, a couple questions. Can you go back to I think the slide before this one on greenhouse gases? I mean, it just never really hit me, how small a percentage those reductions are until I saw this. I mean, it's just kind of bordering on statistically insignificant. And it's like really, really small.
Right.
And so
we don't have, there's only 5 projects, and in the Boston region, we don't have like new projects, like new roads or new, the Green Line extension project is a new transit service, which would give you the most reduction. That's part of the no-bill.
Right.
So you're not going to see that. We also, as part of the, again, as part of the tip, what we have to do, so this just includes those 5 projects. Actually, it's the whole state. It's all the projects in the state that are included in the model. But as part of the tip, with the smaller projects, and that's in Appendix B of the tip, we have to show each project and what impact it has on carbon dioxide. So I can't remember the number of tons, but as part of that, that's where you're getting a lot of the reductions.
Yeah.
And I can't remember off the top of my head what that is, but it's a lot more than this.
A lot more
It's
than-
more
okay.
tons. And that's included in there.
Okay.
So you're getting more impact from these smaller projects, and the MPO has decided that they don't want to put all their funding into these major, I guess, like 2 plans ago, we had all these, like, I-93, 95 interchange in Woburn and Canton, these huge projects that took a lot of the money.
Right.
And in the last plan, they decided that they were going to spend it more on these programs.
Right.
The streets, that's where you're going to get more of your bang for the buck.
With respect to the greenhouse gases?
Greenhouse gases.
I got it. Okay, so a couple of questions in short. With respect to the plans that are submitted by the public, I guess by public you're really meaning like, public entities like towns and cities,
So,
right?
I didn't hear the beginning.
So when we talk about, you say like, in order to create your universe of projects from which you make a selection, you get public input. And I'm taking it that's public input is like from towns because they need to kind of come to you with a real plan, right?
Right, so,
Right.
but in the needs assessment, it's input from anybody that gives us input. So when we're out doing the needs assessment, we want to know what your transportation needs are. So that's summarized, but we can give you that information about this need, but in order to get a program or a project on the tip of the LRTP, it has to be a public entity, which brings forward a project.
Right.
So as part of the process, they bring forward these projects and we evaluate them based on how well they meet the criteria that we've established under our 6 goal areas. So we look at safety.
All right. This is just a follow-up to this one question because I still have a comment that I want to make. So with the TIP, we, as you know in the MPO meetings, they talk about, just sometimes these smaller entities, they don't have the means to do, the work that's necessary to present a project. And so that kind of limits the nature of the universe in which you select. Or are you seeing that also as a problem with getting projects in the LRTP?
Well, as part of the LRTP, we have projects. We have, when they come down in the universe, we'll have our universe of projects list. There's 2 separate categories. There's one that are actual projects that are in the MassDOT process, but then there's conceptual projects. So we've actually, when we do our needs assessment, we say that there's bottlenecks along this roadway. So we put that in as a conceptual project, that there's a need for improvements along Route 2 from here to here. But that's as far as we can take it. We need some, either the municipality or the state to see that and then develop a project around it.
Right. And if they don't have the means to present you with a plan, if they don't have the means to present you with a plan, then it doesn't get into the universe, right? Yeah, so if it's a need that's in a smaller, in a part of the state, or part of the MPO region where, the municipalities don't necessarily have like the funds, or the expertise in which to present you with a plan, then it doesn't get included, right?
Right, but it also is on federally funded roadways, so
Okay.
local roadways, we don't provide funding.
I got it. All right. So essentially, you're saying that's not really a problem because usually on that scale, the funding would be available.
So sometimes the state may step in, the municipality can work with the state.
Right.
It's, depending on what road, who's
Yeah.
responsible for the maintenance of that roadway.
And one final short comment, is positive. I walk across the intersection of the Fellsway and Route 16. I've been doing that for a long time. And they improved that intersection. It's a big project. It lasted for several months through the winter. And it's now just a real pleasure to walk through that. They have the cross signals for pedestrians on all parts of the intersection, and they widen it. And it's good job. I know that was not in this, I don't know what LRTP it was in. I'm sure we're way back, but they did a good job with that. So.
Yeah, it takes a while for a project to
Yeah.
start to
Yeah.
finish.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
I'm getting lost here in a few different areas, and I guess one is, there's a needs assessment part of this,
Right.
and then there is a what's on the docket, and is a real project, not a conceptual project. Is there any part of this, any part of any one of these documents that shows the delta between the two? Of essentially showing we should have 20 more projects here to actually meet that need?
No.
So we do a need, we don't tie the needs to the projects at all.
We do tie the needs to the projects that come into us. There's,
Right.
like, you're trying to look to see is, like, we have this many needs,
Yep.
and how much are we missing in between? Like, it's a
Yep.
ton of money, and we haven't done that now.
Who does do that? Because where I'm trying to go with this is when I saw the list of projects, I'm having a hard time tying what I think is the nice marketing of this with what in reality is being displayed. Like there's a beautiful picture of a commuter rail train here that's very, very nice, but was that even one of the 5 projects?
No, as I said,
That's where I'm like, it's like Destination 40, and it's like, there wasn't, it doesn't, you can help me understand that.
This is fiscally constrained.
Right.
So you can only look at things that you can do with money available.
So we take the information from Focus 40. So as part of the transit side of the university projects,
Yep.
there's 4 separate tables. There'll be the highway, there's projects, highway conceptual, and then we've taken information from Focus 40 on the next steps. And that's one set,
Yep.
and there's the list of projects in there, and then the big ideas. So as part of that universe, there's a column that says what potentially can the MPO do to help the MBTA with these projects that they've developed. So through Focus 40 for the transit projects, that information is done. That's an unconstrained document. We take that input and include it as part of our plan. And are there any places in the projects that are included in Focus 40 that the MPO can help out with?
So
One of the things that
my quibble should be with, if I don't think things are ambitious enough or have been moved over from a conceptual to a actual somewhere on the project scale, my quibble should be with Focus 40, with the MBTA or MassDOT itself, because you're just really a mechanism to And you live in this world, so you.
Well, I don't live so much in it, but, I went to 200 MPO meetings years ago. But all of the MPO federal conformity documents are done within the constraints of the Clean Air Act and federal transportation funding. And there's nothing preventing a state or a region from figuring out what their needs are and then figuring out where to get the money. But that's not really what this process is. This process, they have to conform with the federal regulations and how they do it.
Right, it's all
Okay.
federal.
Who picks the project?
The MPO.
No, but I mean, do you look at Focus 40 and say, oh, I'm going to take this project, this project, this project, and this project?
No, we don't. So the MBTA is responsible for, we can't just say,
So the
unless we
MBTA
come up
picks
with
the
millions of dollars for them.
Right, the MBTA picks the
Yes.
project. Okay, so if we have concern, we should talk to the MBTA.
Right. So, but what we did do, so from the needs assessment, looking at Focus 40, we added a new program, the Transit Modernization Program, to set aside 5% of our funding for the MPO to help the MBTA with different smaller transit modernization projects. So that was one new thing that we did this year. We also added funding as part of our Complete Streets program to fund dedicated bus lanes, because that's like roadway projects that help transit. So we have put aside some money. That's what I mean, where we looked at what was in Focus 40 and what are some ways that we can help them.
Under the constraints that you have in your role.
Right, so we
But-
did add those.
And I do appreciate that, and this is really helping me kind of put the missing pieces together. But from strictly a group that's focused on the MBTA,
Right.
and I see Destination 4040 and a list of projects, which is Cloverleaf reconfigurations. Woo! We're really, the future is bright. Like we're going to have brand new interchanges at highways in the suburbs. Like it's a frustration on.
We've come.
And I'm venting. I'm on a. Clearly, I didn't have my meetings before this meeting. So I'm on a roll.
We just need a soapbox, right?
We have come a lot, not a long way, we've come down the road, because we've actually flexed highway funding to transit.
Yep.
We've added these programs to help with transit. So if you would have looked at the plans 2 or 3 cycles ago, there was nothing.
And the Western Avenue Lynn project has a direct impact on the quality of bus service. That's a major corridor.
You can make an argument that any road project has an impact on bus service.
If it's a bus, yes.
Yes, great. But
And we hope people will take, the municipalities will take advantage of this funding for dedicated bus lanes. And if they're coming in either as part of a complete street project that they're doing, or simply just a dedicated bus lane. So this would definitely mean that there would be coordination, obviously, with the MBTA on that, because, so it could be the MPO, the municipality, and the MBTA working with this MBTA helping to plan it, the MPO helping to fund it. And then in the end, the municipality will have to maintain it. So.
We could look like you did.
Yeah, I have a couple of things, so feel free to stop me. One thing I just wanted to mention, though, one of the old things that was done a lot was CMAQ funding, which was, and a lot of intersection improvements got done with CMAQ, and they looked at expanding the intersection capacity, which helped with travel speed and air quality in the short run, but 10 years later, you had more vehicles with the same level of congestion and more air problems. So it depends a little bit on the model, protocols, where you actually get to. So I had a couple of questions here, and I also wanted to offer here. There were some questions in Somerville about Seattle's light rail the last couple of days, and the population voted a $54 billion transit fund to do light rail in Seattle. So, I mean, Ann doesn't have the benefit of that here, but that was the general population and the political system that did that. So, so different places are different. And over time, I think this process has related a little bit less and less to the Clean Air Act violations and a little bit more to surface transportation funding and what Congress does every 5 or 7 years in that regard. I did want to ask a tiny bit about air quality, though. So I'm assuming DEP is continuing to go ahead with its annual meetings about the state implementation plan and public comments on that. I know they did it last year, but I haven't heard it. I haven't seen any notices.
I haven't seen it for this year. Usually it's due July 1st.
I haven't seen a notice. That's why I'm asking.
Right, I haven't seen it.
Okay. And just another question. You may or may not know the answer to this, but I'm curious. I guess I should look this up at DEP. But the particulate matter standards were lowered to 12 micrograms per cubic meter a while back, but I assume we're way under that as DEP and EPA measure it.
We would know. We would be told we had to.
Yeah,
do
okay.
it.
All right.
Wait, you mind if I, is that in a good direction, lowering the particulate?
Yeah.
Health purposes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. I mean, in general, there's not, other than Southern California and a few other places, there's not too many regions of the U.S. that have really high violations of the general Clean Air Act standards anymore. I want to ask about climate, though. You know, I keep bringing this up, but anyway. So black carbon has been recognized in the IPCC documents for quite a while now. And, you know, diesel and aviation fuel are major sources of black carbon. So the T is the largest diesel user in the state with 20 million gallons a year. Logan burns 20 million gallons of aviation fuel on the tarmac and 20 million in the first 3,000 feet. In a 20-year model, black carbon, which only stays up in the air for a couple of days, but over a 20-year period, that bit of black carbon has 3,200 times the potency of CO2, which stays up for the whole time. So that tells you the difference in impact. And if you were actually modeling climate pollutants and not just CO2 or, quote, traditional greenhouse gases, but if you were modeling the climate pollutants that the International Protocol Committee models, you would have very different prejudice about the kinds of transportation we fund. And, you know, I've been bringing that up for a number of years. There's an infinite number of papers on it from MIT and everyone else who does real climate science. But
So you are working with the DEP on this?
so I'm wondering, why is the state not following that science, which is pretty mature at this point?
Right, so have you been working with DEP? Because they're the ones that actually are responsible for, you know, we help with global warming solutions.
Yeah, I brought it up with the secretary a couple of times. She's got a good enough background to understand this, so I guess I can bring it up with DEP. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, they establish the state feds do their regulations. If the state were to bring that in, they would do that as part of their regulations as well.
Well, I don't know. Okay, I don't think I have too much else. I don't want to take too much time. The other one thing that I would say, though, which is a common comment of mine, you know, the MPO has great data, really. They have quite granular data. The traffic analysis zones are about a third of a census tract on average. Their boundaries are drawn a little differently, but there's a relational table. But a third of the census tract is pretty granular. And when it comes to the environmental justice disparities, in my view, they all occur within the highest 5% of exposure. And the way we model this is by looking at the whole region population of environmental justice versus the whole region population of non-environmental justice. And so we completely cover over those high exposure areas where the most egregious disparities happen, next to highways or next to airports or ports or next to other really large sources of emissions. And I think that's a mistake. So I'll stop there, and I appreciate your coming and talking with us today.
Thanks. I had another question, but I want to make sure.
Are you getting in your soapbox too? 'Cause we're doing it,
I have a question, even though I'm really just supposed to be here to like answer any questions that you have to service money. But you had mentioned, you sort of touched on induced demand, and I've been wondering this about CTPS and the MPO, particularly with the work that I've been doing for Suffolk Downs mitigation. How do you take induced demand, like for example, when doing a large roadway project that helps the traffic flow better, teasing out additional trips that weren't taken because it was so terrible before in terms of congestion? Like, how does that relate to the emissions calculations and also to the project selection?
We don't look at any induced demand, and that is part, as Wade had mentioned about the CMAQ funding, part of, there's different funding categories for projects, and there's a CMAQ, congestion mitigation and air quality funding, that to use that funding, you have to show that you're reducing emissions. And that's always been, and then also another on top of that, there's a requirement that we have a meeting among the MPOs, DEP, EPA, and Federal Highway, to determine that these projects are eligible. And that comes up, it hasn't come up actually in the last few years, but DEP always brings up about the induced demand. We have talked about doing, a study for that, but that would also be, DEP wants a study done. It hasn't been done, it hasn't, it could be something we do as part of bringing for a clean work program. We'd have to bring that idea to them, and then the MPO would decide that they would like want to do this study. So we look at, as we, for what we do for federal requirements, and this is for federal funding, we show the 2020 and the 2040, but it's at an aggregate, it's not at a specific intersection or whatever. So that would be, and I haven't really talked about it, but haven't really heard it recently. Is this could potentially be the study that's done as part of the program?
Thanks, Stephanie. You said you had something.
Yeah, I'm curious about the build and no build. If I understand it right, the two were build with transit and highway included, or no build both transit and highway.
Right.
Is it realistic and or feasible and or useful to break it out into four? So you had a build and no build for highway and transit separately.
No, because our travel man model includes all of the, transportation system. So it would be a lot of work to try and pull it out. So it includes, so the no build obviously is anything that's on the ground, and then, anything that is under construction. So you only take credit once per project. So if it used to be part of the build, now it's under construction or advertised or in the first year of the TIP. It's considered a no-build because it's moving forward.
Yep.
And then the build projects are those that, any new project that we include in the plan.
Got it. But if
Because
you
that
did,
can change. I mean, like, this is a 20-year plan. So like
Sure.
I said, two plans ago, we had all these huge projects, these big interchange modernization projects that just we pulled out, we didn't fund them.
Yeah.
So that's why until it gets to that stage, if it's in the first year of the TIP, under construction and advertised, it's
Sure.
considered a build project.
but resources to do it aside, do you think there would be even value in analyzing build, no build for highway separate from transit?
I don't think so,
Okay.
because, we're a very mature system. Our projects are mostly maintenance type projects. We're not adding, like I said, like the Green Line was a new transit project. There hasn't been a new transit project that's been added other than that. We have the-
BRT.
Right. So, in the highway projects, you're saying, it's like, most of it is maintenance. This is such a mature system that costs a lot of money, so So that's why we had, we have for the major infrastructure, this $20 million as a major infrastructure project, but we had a lot of discussion about that this time around, and people were like, just because it costs that much, it's really projects that add capacity to the system. So you may see in the next plan that we don't have this $20 million cut-off.
Just want to say, sometimes it helps to think instead of build, no build baseline. I mean, if you just, so just kind of think of the status quo as a baseline, and then everything else, is the build. So that's why you wouldn't want to break out, anything beyond what you already have. So it's like this, projects that are underway now are your baseline, and then anything new coming in the LRTP is what you're comparing that to. So breaking it out, it's other categories wouldn't make sense because you have your baseline kind of includes everything you have. That made me get over the issue that you have because that was where you are a while ago.
Excellent.
Right.
Thanks.
I'll finish up with a comment and a question. First, the comment, I'm really happy to see the funds allocated for dedicated bus lanes and for, I forget the last item, transit modernization. I'm glad to see that. The question was about is the scoring criteria used the same for the TIP as for the LRTP projects?
Not so much, because for the TIP, we evaluate a project once it's at 25% design. So you have a functional design report that has some engineering work that's done with it. LRTP projects can be conceptual at this point, so we don't know, like we can go in and look and say this project area has this many crashes, and we can assume that if we improve it, the crashes would go down. Or this pavement is bad, but you can't get into the finding, so it's much more broad brush. Generally, is this project moving us towards our goals and objectives?
But the
But it's still-
the criteria line up. It's just you don't have the
detail.
precision.
Right. So we use the 6 MPO goal areas for both the TIP and the plan. And this time, and every time we do a plan, we revisit the goals and objectives. So you generally, and this is going to be ongoing into next year, once you've updated those goals and objectives, we update our criteria. So that right now, staff is looking at revising that criteria, and I think they're going to start talking with MPO about that maybe next August meeting, just to start that. And I'm not sure if it will be completed for this next round for the TIP, but it is revisited every 4 years. So.
Great. Well, thanks very much. We really appreciate you coming tonight to tell us about LRTP, answer our questions, hear our venting.
Is everybody on the MPO list, sir? So that
I'll double
we
check.
can,
I think
we can, we'll definitely get the information out. We have our blog, our Twitter, we'll send it out. Do you know how many people? I think there's about 2,500 at least people on the MPO, and I think we have a different groups, so hopefully next week.
It just turned 6:15. Can I throw in one more question? Just very quickly, before you speak. In terms of retrospective on the whole project, was there, or is there anything where you look at all this work that's nearly completed, but about to be published, and where you were thinking, oh, if only we could have gotten to, or if only we had been able to do a little more on something, any retrospective takeaways on something you would recommend be done differently next time?
I can't think right now.
Okay.
I know that, because this happens, we're going to start it up again. And each time we do this, we revise it, each time we do it. So we didn't have a chance to do scenario planning. We didn't have, there weren't any real questions. We asked the MPO, what is something that you might want to explore? And we didn't do that this time. The last plan we did, and that was when we decided, do we want to spend more money on these big major infrastructure projects or the smaller programs? And so that was decided through scenario planning. The last time we we continue that. So MAPC is now doing their Metro Common, they're doing the land use long-range plan. So, and I'm part of that committee, so now that this is done, that's hopefully, I'm trying to think like next year, it's probably going to be done, so we can coordinate with them to see if there's any issues that they come up with as part of their Metro Common plan that we can look at on the transportation end, which we'll start doing it earlier, maybe in the next year or so.
Yeah, so you didn't really talk too much about that, but in this region, MAPC and the MPO are a twin pair, whereas in a lot of regions, they're one entity. And the MAPC doesn't redo the regional land use plan that often, so that may or may not open up new ways of thinking about the underlying land use and population and what implications that has for the surface transportation.
Right. And plus with all the, I mean, nothing ever gets done at the same time. So it's always something. And so like all the studies that the MBTA is doing, rail vision and all that. So it's constantly, that's why we constantly update this. And it's, the tip, you can never hear every year, but the plan is required every 4 years. So we can take all of this new information, we were able to use Focus 40 information. For the last plan, we didn't program funding in the last time ban because we were waiting to see what Focus 40, we actually, this time they decided not to, they left in the last time ban a lot of money unallocated as well because we're 20 years out in the future. Any project that we see now is ready to go now. They don't want to wait 20 years to go. Some new project may come up. So we kind of left the last time ban unallocated except for that funding for the different investment programs. So,
if I could, I'd like to go back to one thing that Len mentioned at the beginning, which is about different communities. I do think it is true that some communities have capacity to get a project far enough along to actually be considered by the MPO, and others don't. And part of it is personnel and habit, and whether they've been participating somewhat continuously or not. When Somerville first started to pay attention to the MPO, and I started to come to these meetings before that, to the MPO meetings before that, it was 5 years after they had projects they thought they wanted to do before they actually had their act together enough to get even small projects on track for consideration. They didn't have staff who was used to doing it. They didn't know the processes. So I do think that's an issue, not for any big cities, but I think it's an issue for the smaller cities or the cities and towns with fewer financial resources that they have to decide where they want to spend them. Because you have an initiation effort before you know whether it's going to latch on. Once you get it to a certain point, then it's in the process and there are resources being provided by other people.
Plus, the TIP's already programmed for 5 years, so you're not probably going to get anything in that first 5-year time in, unless projects aren't ready or anything opens up. So.
And there's never enough money for every city and town's desires. So,
and that's
so there's a calculus, a risk calculus there, whether it's worth the effort to gamble on it. So I think your question was, I took your question to be kind of spot on.
And some municipalities decide it's not worth the wait, and they use their Chapter 90 funding to go in and do it. Because they get funding from the state for their roadways, and they decide they're just going to spend their own money to get the project done. And in some cases, if they do that, they don't have to follow federal regulations. Like you can have, you have to have a certain right-of-way, and that means you need to cut trees down. And some people are like, I don't want to cut the trees down, so we're just going to go into this and use our own money. So there's that going on too. So it's really up to what the municipality decides they're going to do.
We have time for.
I just didn't want that question, but it's okay.
I'll give you the judge.
Let's go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I just was wondering about the interplay between the transportation, like LRTP and the land use plan, because, I mean, people don't, probably this group excluded, people don't take a trip just for the pleasure of using that particular mode of transportation or whatever. So presumably, if they're developed at different times, even though, as you mentioned, you're on the committee, and I have full trust in you, you could have something in the transportation plan that doesn't support what the land use plan is. So I guess I mean, you know, having gone to planning school, I'm kind of like, how do they really fit together? And if you want to develop land use in a certain way, then the transportation needs to develop along with it.
We work with MAPC. MAPC does our land use projections. So every time that we do the LRTP, we revisit the projections, and that's actually, you can read about that in chapter 2 of our needs assessment. And MAPC is our land use agency. We're sister agencies. They're on the MPO. Their staff, they do all the land use. We work together with them to come up with the land use projections, which are then also, basically, we work with MAPC for our region, MassDOT for the whole state, and MassDOT develops control totals for each region. And so all the MPOs, there's a committee that was established as part of this plan that met for probably 2 years from the beginning of the first 4 years of this plan to come up with the projections statewide that are agreed upon by MassDOT, and then MAPC and CTPS work together. There's CTPS is the staff to the MPO. To do the land use allocation, so it's MAPC's work that the MPO votes on. So they're not two completely different things. It's just that MAPC worked with us to develop these projections that are used in the model now as part of their MetroCom, and they're looking at what-if scenarios. And then when they come up with recommendations or whatever, and the MPO agrees with those, next 4 years, we'll have new land use projections. So they aren't two separate things going on. So they are the land use agency for the MPO. We just happen to have two different agencies.
All right, well, again, thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you very much.
And then we'll let you know.
750 pages.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Good
But it's
reading.
fun reading.
Good bedside reading.
No, it'll be fun. No, I'm looking forward to it.
So by the way, you mentioned earlier, you guys don't do live streaming for your meetings, but you might want to. I think this whole setup that we got here was like less than $300 all told, except for the laptop. So drop me an email if you want any recommendations on how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have a card, but if,
I can send. I can.
Yeah.
Let me as a point of contact, yeah, because this is surprisingly effective on a shoestring budget, and it's, all the software is open source, and I'd be happy to share with you guys how we do it. Thank you.
I'm just gonna
Oh, yeah, I mean, feel free. I can help if you want.
I don't want any AED triggers. We don't want any AED triggers.
You probably know more than I do. That's what I'm shooting.
Okay, I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover for the marketing subcommittee report. I won't say ad nauseum, but
Yep, so back to our next item on the agenda was the subcommittee reports. We did the MCOP earlier, out of order, and so now let's do capital. Yes.
Sure. I apologize, I wasn't here earlier to go over. All right, so I don't have any notes from the meeting, so I'll go out of memory. And Glenn can correct me if I'm out of line. So we We had a chance to talk about a few things we had talked about in prior meetings, and kind of we had a good discussion on a lot. One of the things we talked about was a letter about the fare increase that went into effect in July, and I think that's a separate agenda item for this meeting. So I kind of presented I guess a written version of the discussion we had at the meeting for June. We talked about it a little bit. I think Glenn and Karen were more or less in agreement, and here's one, with kind of the content of the letter, but we wanted to kind of bring that forward to the ROC as a whole, and get some further feedback on that, which again we'll do later. We also talked about the Better Bus project, so not to steal from the operational crew, but one of the things I've been doing on my own was looking at the Better Bus project and looking at the routes and timing that goes along with that. So we discussed that a little bit. I sent it over to Len for his feedback. And I think we're going to follow up with some folks at the MBTA separately, so we talked about that a little bit. I don't think there's anything that we're going to present to the ROC as a whole as related to that. That was really just a personal thing that I was doing, but I can certainly share it with anybody who's interested in Andrew and I can't remember interested. We also talked a little bit about fare evasions and means testing. Again, not to steal a thunder from the operational crew, but looking ahead to the implementation of AFC 2.0, what that would mean from a fare validation standpoint. Some of the ideas being floated out by the MBTA, we talked about kind of perhaps tying that into a means tested fare. One of the examples on that front is Seattle, I think, has a fare validation process, but if somebody is low income, instead of giving them a hefty fine that will just kind of further exacerbate the situation, they get them into kind of the low income rider group and kind of encourage them to sign up for that, as opposed to kind of more of a punishment model. They're really trying to help the ridership. So we're still trying to formulate an opinion on that and kind of what that might look like, which is something that we spent a decent amount of time talking about at the meeting. I think those were the most three things that we covered. I don't know if there's anything from the FMCB that.
Well, I kind of read about the quality of life, presentation they did for me where they have improved. I guess the one place I recall that they improved was the cabin bus, cabin, like, I guess, break room area made for the operators. And so they did an assessment and saw that, a lot of the amenities for, staff were deficient, and they quantified how they were deficient, and then as I won't say a study, because I think the goals implemented, all the break rooms, but cabin was first, so they really kind of split it up in a significant way. And so, and I was just happy to see, that they are putting that kind of effort into, the staff, because it's good to assess what's needed, and then to follow through on it I think it's good. I'd like to say that it's going to do X, Y, Z, but that's not quantified at all. I just feel that it at least makes me feel good to see them doing that, and so that's all I can say at this point. And I guess just stop there, because there was something else I wanted to say. I can't remember it, so if it comes back, I'll say it. So that was it.
Sure. I think we talked about not having a meeting in August. Is that the?
Yeah, well, because you and Andrew won't be there.
So if anybody was going to surprise us with their attendance, please don't swing by. But I certainly welcome everybody to the next meetings coming up in the fall. I don't know if there's any guests that.
I have this lined up at this point.
But certainly some good discussion we had in the past, and we'll certainly to continue that. So any questions on CAF?
I know what I was going to say. So they had been planning on doing this for a while. This quality of the improvement of the facilities, the break rooms area, and it was stopped by the previous GM in the middle of last year, and then PopTech took it out of suspension in February this year, kind of moved it along. I don't know why we stopped, but I think kudos should go to PopTech for moving that along, because, so it's good.
One question. I like the idea of means testing, and I had never thought of the correlation to a fare evasion fine. Can you picture a scenario where someone who essentially failed entry into a means-tested low-income fare program would then have the fine reinstated later? And that seems odd in a way. I don't even know if that's possible. Can you, instead of issuing a fine up front, issue a fine later when means testing shows that it's not applicable?
It's really funny that you come up with the odd idea, isn't it?
Sorry.
And then you follow it.
One of my specialties, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think what Len and I talked about, that was a lot of the discussion was, okay, of the fare evasion, how much of it is it people that can't afford versus how much of it is people who intentionally don't pay their fare? And at least I feel strongly that people who intentionally don't pay their fare with the means to, there should be financial repercussions or whatever needs to be done to get them to pay the fare, whatever kind of structure is there. But for the people who truly can't afford, and it's an issue, it comes down to enforcement and kind of the prosecution, if you will, of that case. So I don't know if everybody kind of starts off with a fine, and then for those who truly can't afford, the prosecution turns to getting them into the program, and the fine's dismissed. I think it's part of the evaluation, and I don't know if it's something that can be done by the person handing out the ticket, or if it has to be done later. I think that's something that the T needs to look at and kind of develop a system for what's best. But certainly the thinking of, if we get into a situation where somebody can't afford to pay the fare, how are they going to afford to pay a fine, and
right.
what good is that going to do anybody? So,
well, I'll throw out an idea that just occurred to me and sort of feels right to me, where if you are caught evading a fare, you are fined, but then given the opportunity to qualify for a means testing lower fare program, and then if you do qualify and enroll in that program, you could be reimbursed the cost of that fine by way of, if the fine is $50, then they'll reimburse you the $50 onto your Charlie card account, something like that. Assuming that they paid it. Obviously we don't want to give away $50, but if somebody was fined $50 and they actually paid it, and then they entered the means testing program, reimburse them the $50 back onto the Charlie card.
Support something like that. I think this all kind of gets back to, we don't have means testing today, right? So everybody's fare is the same. That kind of enforcement action assumes that we'd have that in the future, but that's just kind of what Seattle did. They have both, and I don't know if it's the right route, but it's something that we're kind of discussing and trying to come up with an opinion on, I guess.
One of the objections that I read from Gase and I guess one of the writers for the Dick J. premise is that they felt that means testings would lead to a two-tier system, but I don't think that's really the case, because it's not like what you see as proposals for using the highways where you pay more, you get to zip along in a faster lane. I mean, it's like you're not going to get any better key service. Everyone's going to be on the same trains and same buses, and it's not like you're going to have a separate section of the bus to sit in or anything like that. It's like same access, so it's not a two-tiered system at all. It really doesn't matter. Affordability and right now people say they complain about fare increases and people can't afford it, but they can't. A lot of people presumably can't afford what we have now, and so we really need to figure out some way to make the system be accessible to people who need it, because as Brian's letter ends, means like transportation really is a right, because existence is based on getting from point A to point B, and then people can't do that. So I mean, it's not that they can't thrive, they just can't even really survive. I mean, so we've got to make it accessible to everyone, you know. That's it.
I appreciate the attitude of the committee and Brian and Len, and agree with that. Just as to the fine, I think you have to be careful. The Federal Reserve Bank of Boston did a fairly significant study years ago on the Puerto Rican population, which is pretty challenging. And the average adult in the Puerto Rican population in Boston had less than $20 in total funds available. Bank funds and pocket funds and all funds combined. So the ability to charge somebody $50 and then give it back to them, I think in some of this population that's not really an apt test. The other thing I would say is that in my experience riding the buses, which other people have probably done a lot more than I have, I'm not in a high student area. I mean, Somerville does have a lot of young people, but it's not like BU and issues of green line hopping and stuff like that. In my experience, the bus drivers, by and large, behave just the way you would hope they would behave. I mean, they can tell somebody is challenged, is got some handicaps, maybe short of funds, and they handle it pretty efficiently. I'd say 80% of the time, maybe more. So I just want to make that comment to thank them for that. I mean, it's a tough job driving, but also the population is variable on the buses, and I think by and large they do the right thing.
Thanks for the CIF report. Next thing on the agenda was, like you said, the draft letter that you shared.
Sure, should we get into it?
Yep.
I sent out an email to the group. I don't know if that works, if that got through to everybody, but I also brought some dead trees. Oh, you brought your own. Yeah, yours is colored.
I don't know about it.
Would you like one?
Oh, sure.
Wednesday,
So actually, I had a meeting somewhere at 6:30, but so I'll kind of chase and make sure I understand from what I read on it. You're essentially in 3 paragraphs. You're getting at 3 things. You're saying, one, in general, we're okay with the recent fare increase because it's on that periodic schedule and an incremental amount the way we was laid out a few years ago. 2, with that said, in the second paragraph, you're saying we're still not adequately funding transportation. They need to seek additional revenue sources. And then 3, if you're going to do tying back the first issue of fare increases, we're okay with the fare increases, but we don't feel like you're doing a good enough job of going after after cars, essentially.
Essentially it.
Okay. So it's good. Okay.
And 4th, consider means testing for fares.
So what I tried to do was try to incorporate a lot of the discussion we had last month into the letter. I think a lot of the points that were brought up is kind of reflected. I think my initial thinking was there was a lot of negative press about the fare increase. So I kind of looked at it as saying, okay, we've asked the T in the past to not raise fares significantly. We've asked them to do the regular fare increases, so they've kind of followed through on that. Glenn and I have also talked about the separation of capital funding and operational funding. And operationally, the operational costs continue to go up, and that's kind of disjointed from some of the service failures that we view as kind of a disinvestment of capital over 40 years or 30 years or whatever. So that was kind of the genesis of the first thought was, if we agree with what the T does, we should say it. And also trying to think generally about trying to take positions on things. Like, this is something that impacts all the T riders, so we should have an opinion one way or the other. If we agree with it, we should say it. If we disagree with it, we should also say that. And if we think the T should be doing something differently, which I think that they should, and try to getting additional non-fair funding, that's kind of the other items coming there. So that was the background, but exactly those 3 points are kind of what we are looking at now.
I thought the letter was extremely well written. I think there's one tiny subtle grammar issue in the next to last paragraph, 4 lines from the bottom. Source of transit funding that helps to fund both. I think you either need to say to both fund current operations and continue to support, so reverse those 2 words, or else I think you need an S on continue. It's pretty subtle. But I think there's some tiny grammar issue there.
So do you have a...
Yeah, and I can talk to you for 10 seconds after the meeting.
Okay.
The other thing is, I thought in your 2 lines down from there, negative externalities such as congestion, pollution, and climate impacts. I think maybe you should add climate impacts. Transportation is 40% of the climate issue in the state of Massachusetts. So that would be a tiny suggestion.
As being different from pollution?
Yeah, well, pollution, people generally think of current harm.
Sure.
Even though pollution is technically correct. I think if you say pollution and climate impact. But I really like the letter. It was well written.
Yeah, I agree. I think you incorporated the things that we talked about last time, and I appreciate the time and effort that went into it.
So,
When
you mentioned, I thought you were about to switch, go ahead.
No. The first sentence of the 3rd paragraph, there's something awkward about, and I don't have a ready solution at hand, but if you want to, I think it's the fair revenue versus non-transit revenues, or something like that. There's something that, I had a hard time parsing.
So if I change it to consider parity of cost of transit with that of non-transit, is that a more appropriate comparison?
Yeah, I like that. Calling out costs as opposed to revenue.
Yeah, or fair revenue with non-transit costs.
So,
Anything like that makes it parallel?
Well, we're not really asking people to compare the revenue as much as what it costs the user, the road user versus the transit user. So I think calling out in that, again, first sentence, 3rd paragraph, mentioning cost of each instead of revenue would make it more clear. That's a good call.
Yeah.
I'm just saying the perfect is the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
Well,
I think
we're
the letter-
Yeah.
the letter is
we're doing it, we're just
good enough.
fixing it,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah,
maybe
but I don't
better.
know.
Well, then don't know,
Yeah.
so,
I agree.
on the 2nd paragraph, the 4th sentence, other, should be others, and just left on the S in there, in the 1st paragraph, you mentioned something about recent fare increases, and I guess it's a matter of what the definition of recent is, and so, because it's like
It's true.
and so we've kind of been having this policy of doing incremental maybe for like the last 2 cycles. So I might drop the recent, but that's up to you. You authored it, so I just kind of put it out there.
I think that's fair.
And I guess this is something that is a little bit in dispute in grammar worlds these days. That is whether it's whether there's a comma before and or not. So because in some contexts, if you don't have the comma before and, you can combine the 2 into one entity, and it's a little bit confusing. So in the case of the first sentence of the 2nd paragraph, where you have the Rockcast MBTA, the governor's office, it's like, do you have a comma before the and in the state legislature? If you decide that you don't want it, fine. But if you just left it out, and if you want to include it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
True.
It seems to be consistent though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess as long as you're consistent, that's fine. So it's
Yeah, and by the way, I'll second, in the third paragraph, the second sentence, I second the idea of a slight rework there, as previously mentioned. It didn't jump out at me until I reread it after it was mentioned, but yeah, it sounds like what he said will work.
Oh, great job.
Sorry, for which sentence?
For the second paragraph of the third sentence, I'm just voicing my agreement with
Which paragraph?
the third paragraph.
Which sentence?
The second sentence, which starts with, "It does not appear fair."
I thought we were talking about the first sentence. I don't, in that paragraph.
I was jumping back to what somebody had said earlier. But yeah.
He's confusing me.
I'm agreeing with something from like 5 minutes ago.
Motion to approve the letter?
A couple, so I appreciate you putting this out here because there's nothing worse than nitpicking as you go along. Just so in the first paragraph, we say the MBTA ROC believes the current July 2019 fare increase meets these objectives, which lessen the immediate impact on transit riders. I would lose the which lessen the immediate impact on transit riders. There was a fare increase. There was an immediate impact. I guess I'm in disagreement with the part after the comment. There was an impact. We can say it was an appropriate impact, but it wasn't. We didn't lessen the immediate impact.
So what I was trying to say was a smaller increase lessens the impact than a larger increase. So that was the point with that. So do you agree with that point, or do you have a better way to kind of phrase it? Because I agree that there is an impact, but what I'm trying to say is we prefer, I personally prefer 3% or 2% every year as opposed to 6 every 2 or whatever. But I prefer 6% every 2 over 22% every 5 or whatever we've been doing.
Right.
So that's what I was trying to say. I'd rather have a smaller, taken as a whole, it's a lower impact immediately. Because if somebody is used to paying $2 and now they're paying $2.40, that's a hit to their budget that they had for just for, as opposed to going from 2 to 210 or whatever it might be.
Perhaps adding.
Now that you explained it that way, I'm okay.
Perhaps adding the word unexpected, or substituting immediate with unexpected, as opposed to calling it an immediate impact. But it lessens the unexpected impact by having a regular amount of increase at a regular time period. It's less of a surprise.
Okay.
So in other words, it lessens the unexpected
I
impact.
don't like the word surprise.
No, that's surprise, unexpected.
Unexpected.
Yeah, in other words, which lessen the unexpected impact.
My only point is, I don't think you need it, because all you're saying is that you say meet these objectives, and all we're doing is, we already used a regular and unpredictable in the sentence before, we're just saying it meets the objectives.
I'll defer.
I'm not gonna die in this order.
If you wanted to drop the second half of that sentence, or just replace immediate with unexpected, either way, I'm okay.
Or keep it. Do we still want to put an acknowledgement in here to say that we are appreciative that even a moderate increase like this does affect some riders?
Sorry, what's the question?
That's sort of obvious.
Keep it in there?
No, if we're representing all riders,
Yeah.
I think do we need to make, I think we're phrasing this as like, right, I understand a lot of the press was negative, but I also understand there are folks that even a moderate increase is still painful. I'm just wondering if we need to put some kind of sentence in here to acknowledge that while we're taking this position, we are appreciative of those who have voiced concerns about any increase whatsoever.
Well, Well, I think the bottom where we talk about, the implication about the need to means testing is kind of getting at that, we really need to do something, with respect to, affordability of of access to the system. And
Yeah.
because even, even with current fares, I mean, people are having issues, and that's what the whole means testing thing is getting at. No?
I agree with that on that for what it's worth. But
I'm happy
I see your
way,
point.
but I think the last paragraph is critically important, and I think you've done a good job with that. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't want to be, I'm trying to split the baby here in terms of we understand why you would need to do it without being too much of a cheerleader for it.
Yeah.
I don't want to, I don't think we're doing, understanding how upset the ridership is over this. I think we put our logic hats on and say, okay, we understand the logic need for it without being too strong of a cheerleader for it. The only area where I would, in that middle paragraph, the middle sentence, while the MBTA ROC believes fare increases in place in modern regional transit system, I feel like you could almost strike that whole beginning of this sentence and just jump to, it is apparent that additional outside funding is necessary to kind of condense that. Because essentially that MBTA believes fare revenue has its place is just restating our cheerleading in the first paragraph of, I don't know,
It's
if everybody else is comfortable with it, I can get comfortable with it. I'm just,
author's prerogative on that one, Okay. So I have a quick, so is it impact to or impact on? Quick group, do you think that things have an impact on things or impact to things?
I think it's impact on, but it's a modernization to say impact to. I don't think it's,
Okay, all right, fine.
I don't think it's egregious.
Okay, that's fine. I was just asking, so it's fine, All right, cool. No, great job.
Yes, and kudos, great work.
So Craig, to your point, I agree with your general kind of thought there. We don't want to be too much of a cheerleader, and I think when I was going through kind of the logical reasons, I left a lot of those out for that reason. But I do think we could add something, we were talking about the fare increases are increasingly unpopular. In that sentence, reference the, the strain on budgets or something along those lines in that regard.
So I'll make a motion to approve the letter, read, and the author gets to take our feedback, incorporate it however the author wants, and that we will then, approve the letter for publication on the
Seconded.
website.
In favor?
Oh, that was reluctant, right? So you want more review?
Any opposed?
What's that?
You want more review?
no, I mean, ultimately, I think, I may quibble with parts of it, but I like the idea of us taking a stance on taking more of a stance on things.
Thanks. Any opposed or abstaining? I don't think we had anyone. So moved.
Salon, take care.
See you, Craig.
We had on the agenda approval of minutes, and I couldn't.
You didn't get them?
I couldn't find them, so I'm not.
I sent them. Didn't I send them?
I got it.
You got them, okay.
I got them.
Yeah. This is the second
So
time you didn't get them.
I'll-
Last time you didn't get them. I'll send them to you personally next time. Something's going wrong and you're not getting them, so I'll just make sure that I send it to you directly next time. Because send it through the group,
Yeah,
So,
check your email on the Google group. It might be an outdated one or it might need to be updated.
So I'll abstain, but do we need the motion to?
I'm motion to approve.
I have one thing that I'd like to add, even though these are extremely thorough. In the middle between 6:15 and 6:34, we were talking about people asked about the pedestrian bridge at Assembly, and I commented about DCR, which is absolutely accurate. I also made a comment that the T in that area, namely the Charlestown Garage property, had been extremely cooperative with ideas of the pedestrian and bike. So there's a way of adding like 6 words to that effect, that just below the DCR operations, which was a correct, accurate reflection of my comments. If you could just put in that I really appreciated the T at the Charlestown Yard being real cooperative on that.
Yeah. Can I have a suggestion? If you don't already have Wig's direct email address, probably should give it to him. Just in case he's got questions about
It's
that
not a
insert.
super big deal. I mean, these are, as always, we get super service from the people that help us with our minutes, and I appreciate it.
No, but if there was no mission and it's worth
Well,
making sure it's in there.
I just wanted to give them the pat on the back that I had given them in the real comment.
Sure, I'm just saying that if he needs to verify with you,
Yeah, sure, no,
if he can email you directly.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know if you have from previous folks all of our individual email addresses, but you certainly, I probably should have all of them.
Yeah, you can do that. Don't feel like you have to do that. I mean, you can improvise with 6 words of your own. That's absolutely fine with me.
I'm ready to clear my throat.
Just for the record, time check, it's 6:57 and a half.
So can we approve those with the?
Yeah, I'd vote to approve, certainly.
Yeah, second. All in favor? Any against?
One abstain.
No,
I found
two
it this
abstain.
time.
Okay.
2 abstains. Okay, but when it's approved. I don't have the agenda in front of me.
It's external meetings, old new business, public comments in 2 minutes.
I'll suspend any mention of old and new until next time. Nothing's pressing.
The only good thing is, Linda Dillon says that we can visit the PIC, being the Public Information Center, I think that is, being for the commuter rail, any day during the week of August 19th at 5 o'clock. So starting, I'm not sure how long it takes.
We should allow an hour.
So we should decide on what day of the week we want to go that week of August 19th.
I would be interested to go out to see the factory where they're making the red and orange lines on a Saturday, maybe take a bus trip, maybe in the fall.
But with respect to doing the thing, this is on Atlantic Avenue, right?
Yes.
Okay, so.
It's about a block and a half from South Station.
Yeah. So do people here have a preference for the day of the week?
For me, no preference. And in case we don't have calendars in front of them, we're talking about the week of the 19th of August, which is the week before the August public meeting, and it's 2 weeks after the regular operations committee week.
And I thought we weren't going to have a meeting next month, are we?
That was pending Linda's confirmation. Yeah, so now that we've got that confirmed,
Sure.
I think we'll essentially turn the August operations meeting into this visit, but it'll be 2 weeks after the regular week
So then.
for these meetings.
So then we have to pick a day with Tuesday, work for folks?
Tuesday.
Tuesday is good? Tuesday the 20th?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good. Any concerns from anybody who's here? I guess that's more the question, any concerns? Having been there before with Bonnie, I say it's a recommended visit.
Linda's very enthusiastic. She's always been supportive. And one thing I can say about her is that no matter what's going on with Keolis, good or bad, she responds. So.
Yep. You're here. Yeah, for the record, Linda Dillon is an excellent supporter and partner with us on the Right River Lake Committee.
Right. Don't see any public comments.
Yep.
So we'll entertain.
Motion to adjourn? Seconded?
It's a good meeting.
Any against? Adjourn.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
And thank you again for your help first before.
Yeah, so the first one was.
So, you want me to-
And for those watching online, thank you.
To fund both current operations